Think we're good to start. Kelly, you feeling good to
I'm
go?
feeling good.
All right. Welcome everyone. Good evening. This is Families Unified for Education in Laguna's second webinar, presenting our very own Kelly Osborne, who was a former school board member with us from 2020 to 2024, so during pandemic. Um, She also has a master's in education and is currently teaching over 4,000 students at 8 different school sites in environmental literacy. And she obviously has her multiple subject teaching credentials. So, just really an expert in the field of education, but also has this governance experience that obviously we would love to learn more about from you. Anyways, I'm going to let you take it from here, Kelly, and then we can just kind of chit chat a little bit about questions people might have, and I might interrupt you every once in a while.
No, that sounds great. So really nice to be with everybody and to be back on Zoom. That kind of rewinds me to 2020. So thank you for the nice introduction. And I think by the end of tonight, hopefully everybody has a better sense of what we mean when we say board governance. We kind of thrown that term around a lot, but I'm going to take you guys through some slides. And Shaheen, I'm going to go ahead and just share the
Go
slides
for it.
now. And I really appreciated that nice fade in and out. That was kind of nice.
I'm trying really hard, yeah,
Yeah,
to make this really special for you. Thanks, Kelly.
nice. I know. Oh, I don't know what this is. I'm going to share here. There we go. Okay,
Here we go. We can see it.
perfect. So, effective school boards, that's obviously the topic for tonight. And we will just kind of dive into the agenda. So, we're going to talk about why we have school boards. We're going to talk about governance mindset. We're going to talk about the overall structure of governance. Part 4 is actually kind of like what a board member does day to day. Then we'll have a little break for Q&A. You can put Q&A in the Q&A part of Zoom as we go along or when we get to 5. And then we're going to pivot. We're going to talk a little bit about bonds, talk about the 2001 bond, talk about the facilities master plan, and we can have questions after that too. So hopefully everybody will get something out of tonight. And let's keep going. Guys, why it's not going. Hold on. There we go. Okay.
Oh,
Sorry. So why we have a school board, this is a long description, but I think it's worth reading because there's a lot of key terms in here that if we read closely, we might really have kind of a high level view of why school boards even exist. So locally elected school board members are providing citizen oversight for the community schools. They're protecting the public's interest in ensuring a free and equitable public education system in the United States. When governing effectively, school boards ensure success for all students. That's why I bolded it. That's probably the most important part. How they do that is by making decisions that fulfill legal mandates and align district systems and resources. And in order to govern effectively, boards act collectively, openly, they're guided by community interest, and informed by the recommendations of the superintendent and the professional staff. I think that really is a really good starting point. So we're going to talk about kind of the mindset of an individual board member. This is something that really helped me. These are kind of 5 really important mindsets to have. We'll go through each one. But when we think about governance, we want to be patient, professional, trustworthy, student-focused, and we want to be modeling behavior. I think this applies to all elected officials. These are kind of the things that people are looking for. But I want to dive into at least my experience over the last 4 years. First off is being patient. Our terms are 4 years. There are many board members that serve, at least in our district and across the state, for many terms. We have Bob Whalen served for 10 years. We had Ketta Brown served for 12 years on our school board. We had Jan Vickers served for 24 years, if I counted her terms correctly. So what I learned early on is that this is a marathon and not a sprint. Even 4 years is a long time. And your first year, you have to really learn to be patient. There's a lot of deep learning that happens. Locally elected school board members are not really meant or expected to be experts in the how the district has been running or what is currently happening at the district. And the first thing they're usually advised to do is try and discard any previous notions about the district, because until you're on the board, typically you only had half the story. Maybe what you experienced as a parent or a community member, maybe as a former employee. Sometimes they'll join the board even. Many districts have former principals as board members. So, any kind of notion you had kind of gets discarded as you start to move into your governance mindset. And then this is where you start to transition from me, right? Like what I want or what I might think, to we, because you're transitioning into this collective decision-making body. But it takes a lot of patience, especially for people that are really used to just, want to dive in and get things done. I think people that run for elected office have that, can-do attitude. And
Sure.
best advice I got was to just slow down and focus on learning and understanding where you might be most effective. For me, this is literally a picture of my bookshelf in 2021. Those were the books that I read. They're dog-eared and highlighted, and it really gave me a really strong foundation for
Are those
what we're
books,
trying to do.
Kelly? Oh, sorry. Are those books from like that you got from CSBA, or where did you find those books for yourself as you were navigating that first year?
Yeah, CSBA, other board members, you do go to annual conference, you go to countywide gatherings of trustees across the county, and you have a cohort of people that are learning how to be a good board member and trying to be effective and helpful. So some of those are recommendations from other trustees. Um, yeah, okay, so other things, I have some other pictures up here. I was really interested in safety. You can see the Park Avenue bike lane, a 3-year project. We thought it would be simple, like submitting a ticket to the traffic and parking group, but things aren't simple, again, because there's a lot of learning, there's a lot of patience. Um, we talked a lot about in the community about the pool project, many, many years, right? We talked a lot about sustainability. You can see we started working on that in 2021. We passed a resolution in 2022, and it has actions that are going all the way out to 2030. So again, there are these longer range things that are happening. All right, so that was the first mindset. The second's a little more simple. This is just about governing professionally. You want to be kind of a systems thinker. You want to definitely be strategically focused. You get told all the time not to get down in the weeds, right? Not to sweat one grade level's CASP score at one school site. And that's totally true, right? You want to think holistically and strategically about where the district could go. There are a lot of people watching, and you really have to manage your manner. You want to be inclusive and collaborative, but sometimes it's better to just, maybe hold some of your thoughts as you develop them. And then you have to be prepared. This was one of my biggest areas of emphasis, having done the research, the reading, the preparation, the phone calls.
Kelly, what does that look like for a board member in terms of preparation and reading? Like, how much time are you spending at a normal clip of meetings to
So
prep
like
for meetings?
a normal agenda, probably 4 to 6 hours, just reading the items. We have a really nice system. You can annotate items. We have a lot of protocols on our board about how you would get questions answered, and there's a lot of timelines to meet with, the superintendent on your questions so that they're answered. Yeah, so it's a lot of reading and preparation for sure.
Yeah.
All righty. This next one is really important to me. I think being trustworthy is really important, and I'll give you some reasons why. It's not just about like, having nice people and a nice picture. Um, when you join a board, you're just one person, and there are four other people that you have to cooperate with. You don't have to agree with, but you have to cooperate. And then you have a superintendent, and the superintendent has ideas, and each board member has ideas, and you all have to work together. So I found that it was really important to try and get to know each board member individually, get to know the superintendent individually, create a positive culture, try and put the past behind, and really support each other. Really support the superintendent. He is your only or she is your only employee. And just like if you were running a large team in corporate America, whoever your subordinates or your supports were, you would want to have a really good rapport with them if you expected any high achievement or high performance to come out of them. So I always felt that was really important. I spent a lot of time doing that, trying to make time to have lunch or coffee or conversations or outings with each person and know really what they were interested in, why they were on the board. That helped me a lot. And then you have this little bit of self-reflection, right? Like obviously some part of the community elected you, might not be all, but there was an election, so you can hope that the community trusts you and you want to continue to build on that. I think being prepared and articulate is one way you can show that. You want to make sure your fellow board members trust you. They kind of know what to expect from you. You definitely need the superintendent's trust. And again, kind of being honest and open, saying what you need to say, I thought helped me a lot. And this is all backed by research. So it's not just like, oh, because you want to all get along and be happy. There is a lot of, especially in the field of education, a lot about relational trust and how it drives school improvement. Parents entrust their children to schools. Teachers entrust their principals to make them great places. Superintendents entrust their board to be in it for the right reasons. And I really kind of felt strongly about this. And it turns out that there was a recent study. This was really cool. In 2020, there was a literature review, like one that will go in and look at all of the educational research about school governance. So basically about school boards.
Yeah.
And they looked at 5,000 studies, and they're trying to kind of pick out how can school boards actually influence educational outcomes, right? Like,
Okay.
what are the things that they do or don't do that might have an impact on the education in that community? And so there's all kinds of things like, how well they evaluate this or they do that. But it turns out that the biggest correlation and the most promising area for future research is in these studies that look at basically the relationship between the school board and the superintendent. And I found that really fascinating, that's one of the most important ways that you can drive educational quality. So
Having sat in that seat, Kelly, and now with this study, do you have a thought about why that is?
I think I'm a big believer in taking a lot of risks and having really high expectations of at all levels of education. So in an individual classroom for your student, right? At a school site for results out of that school site, at a district level, results that you want that superintendent to deliver, but they have to feel like you've got their back too.
Sure.
And they might want to take certain risks, and if they don't work out, that they're still supported. And I think when you understand each other at a deeper level and you have that good relationship, it makes it much more likely that you're going to get there. So anyhow, that was kind of interesting. So we'll move on from trust, but really that was really important to me. And did I skip one? Was I on 3 before, guys? And now I'm on
We're
4.
on 3. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
You're good.
All righty. So remaining committed to youth is probably the one that we've been hearing about a lot. Like, are we student focused as board members? Of course, like that should be what's driving our efforts. We want to represent the needs of all children. I will say, just from my experience, if you have kids in the district and you're serving as a board member, you have to really work at this. You have to start to move what you've done as a parent or as a PTA leader. That has to go to the side because you're now representing all students. And that's really important. It was in the definition of why we have school boards. You're starting to join together with your board in this shared moral imperative, right? To represent every student in the district, set district goals collaboratively that everybody can agree on. In our district, we were very, very serious about continuing to improve, right? We're not done improving. We might be, really excelling in an area, but that doesn't mean that we can't excel further. And I found the best way to do this was to be extremely data driven, not hearsay, not kind of what I think or what I thought or what a principal told me. It really came down to the data, right? The CASP data. And when the CASP data wasn't delivered on a frequency that could really drive results, we went to more iReady data, California Healthy Kids data on our mental health side, and challenge success, which measures a whole host of things. But these were the metrics where we could set district goals with, and you could look at them over long range, which was really important for that kind of systems thinking and strategic vision.
Now, Kelly, you have a background as an iBanker in a past life, I guess that's how I would say it, maybe.
Yes.
And so for you, analyzing data and digesting that is you were trained to do that.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
When we're talking about sort of this first year of a board seat, how do you start that process if you don't have that background, or what advice would you give on that front?
It's the budget, Jeff Dixon, our wonderful CBO, he makes the budget really complex. So even if you don't have a finance background, you should be able to understand that. It's not
Sorry, you
overly
said he
complex.
makes it complex or he makes it simple?
He makes it simple. It's not
Yeah.
overly complex. It's a school district budget, right? You've got the income coming in, you've got the expenses going out. Large percentage is salary and benefits. And so it's not complex. So that should never scare anybody off understanding a budget, even if they don't have a finance background. The school data is harder, I will say. And there's many types of assessment data. And it changes, every decade the state decides they're gonna look at it differently, or how we administer or rank certain things is going to change. So you do have to kind of stay on top of that. We had years where we had no CASP data because of the pandemic. And I felt like some years you kind of had blinders on because you didn't know what you didn't know yet, in terms of how the kids were doing academically. Alrighty, last one. This is kind of the last of these individual mindsets of what it takes to govern. Boardsmanship is obviously really important. We govern, or we have to govern with the Brown Act. We have to govern with this concept of having strong boardsmanship, like, for example, letting everybody speak once before you speak twice, right? Because you're all on a board together and you really want to hear from your fellow board members what their thoughts are on something. Some of that might be different than other meetings that you've participated in. Maybe you weren't equal to everybody else, right? Maybe you were the boss and you had more to say because you were the boss, or what have you. This is also where we get into relationships with other elected officials. I mentioned earlier, you start to meet a lot of trustees across Orange County school districts and compare notes, and you're always representing your district, right? You want to be representing your district in the best light possible. You want to be, interfacing with city council where appropriate, or other members of the community or community groups. And this is always where you have this behavior expected of you that's at another level, right? And, of course, we want our students to be modeling this civic behavior, right? Discourse, being, just showing care and concern, kind of simple stuff. And I can't stress this enough. It's really great if you're articulate. You say what you need to say and let somebody else speak.
Yeah. Okay.
So on that note, we're going to move forward. And this is a really cool slide that tries to put it all together. I know it's a little bit busy. I hope you guys can track it. But those 5 mindsets I just gave you are on the left side of my screen, which is kind of the individual mindset. You know, that you're a deep learner, you're strategically focused, you're mindful, you're confidential. Those are your individual mindsets that you have to develop as a board member. Then we start to transition into these like governance mindset, right? For example, like what's the role of this governance board now, collectively? What are the norms that are going to support that? Right? If I'm deep learning about the board's agenda and I've spent 4 hours working on it, and now I have these questions, there's a set of protocol and norms that the board follows to get those questions answered, so that everybody's getting them answered in the same way and on the same schedule, so that when we all show up for a meeting, we're prepared and ready to go. So that's an example. There's many more, but this is transitioning into this group governance mindset, not all thinking the same way, but collaboratively now as this unit. And then once you can operate that way, we move to this purple box, which is great, which is now the board can actually set strategic goals, right? We know how to be articulate and confidential and work together, and each person gets to speak. And so that's where we get into the fun stuff of setting strategic goals for the district, establishing structures, like maybe there are budgetary areas that need to shift, ensuring accountability. This would be where maybe we're tying the superintendent goals to the strategic direction that we want the district to go in, and then demonstrating and showing that how we're moving towards that to the community. Down below in the blue box, those are all the things the district does. So a school board member doesn't need to be concerned about human resources or collective bargaining. Those will come to us when they're in the strategic camp, or when they're going to affect something on a grander scale with the budget. But that blue box is all the district functions. And then at the bottom, where you see all the arrows, this is all of the issues going on in public education. So board members do need to be aware of what's happening at the state level. We get new educational mandates. For example, in my term, we had a mandate to have ethnic studies be a graduation requirement. It had to be a locally developed course approved by the board. And, you know, every school district had to offer it starting with this year. We actually offered ours a year early, but those would be things that the board sees coming and have many years to work on. I also had a lot of work that we had to do around COVID-19. That's why you see that cute little ball there that we never want to look at anymore. AI. So these are the current trends. How are we adapting? How does the strategy of the district changing or adapting to these new trends?
And how are you getting fed that information, Kelly? Like the trend information? Is that coming through just like CSBA or, sorry, the California School Board Association, or where is that information coming from? Or are you, as a board member, actively seeking out that information?
Yeah, so we get, yes, we get a lot of information, more than you ever want, through CSBA. We also get subscribed to different publications that might be of interest. The ones that the rest of the district is reading, like Ed Week. There are annual conferences that we go to. There's quarterly presentations, especially as it pertains to the budget, maybe the state or federal budget. And lastly, I'll say some people like me, I really like to read, you know, actual academic journals to really see if there was new things happening in academia that might impact what we want to do in our district. So those are all the different ways. All right, so hopefully that makes sense. But at the end of this, that little orange box, if the district is working in conjunction with the board and, you know, they're really kind of in sync, I hope this shows like they're in sync, that we have success for each and every student. That's the end goal. That's why it's shown there, but you have to move from this individual mindset to this collaborative partnership, to this high level strategic thinking with the district doing their job, and then we get success for students. All right, so day to day, like what does a board member actually do? This was a big question for me in 2020. So I've kind of broken it down here. It's kind of a boring slide, but on a weekly basis, you're preparing for board meetings. There's a lot of individual first year training to do, a lot. And you're working on following the protocols. Sometimes they don't make sense in the beginning, right? You kind of think, oh, I should just be able to do whatever I want, ask whatever I want, whenever I want, say whatever I want. And again, if you go back to that like patience and trust aspect, following some of these protocols really makes you a lot more effective in the long run. You're getting community feedback. We get a lot of emails. You try and respond to them or address them. And then we have a weekly superintendent's office. He or she will send an update, which is also somewhere between 5 and 10 pages of reading about everything that's going on in the district for the week. On a monthly basis, we represent ourselves to outside organizations that are on our annual organizations list. Sometimes there's working committees. There's no shortage of events you can attend. Obviously, back to school night, open house. Those are the big ones, right? Where you're really looking at student learning and family engagement in the individual sites in and up close. And then we have this monthly governance calendar, which kind of shows each month there are certain mandates by law that have to be met in certain months. But you know, it kind of tells you what's coming up each month. So you know if you have a question about, say you have a concern with a labor issue, you know typically when the board deals with the sunshine of a proposal. If you have a budget question because you have a new idea that, you know, for some new stream of funding or use of funding, you know kind of when the budgeting discussions are. And then on a quarterly basis, we look at policy development. For example, we heard a lot of community input in my term on the use of devices, smartphones, technology in the classroom. We heard a lot about that. We looked at our green schools operation policy. There are other policies that we have to update because the law has changed. So there's a lot of work done on policy development. We get our reports on the LCAP process, which is obviously aligned to the district's goals and the superintendent's goals. It's all aligned. And we do the budget approvals. It's quarterly, and then annually, the big stuff, right? What is the direction we want the community schools to go in? What are the goals we set for the superintendent to get us there, right? The board only has one employee, so you're only dealing with that one person. And then how are you going to evaluate the superintendent at the end of the year? And that's a personnel matter, so it's done in closed session, but on a really strategic board, those are all aligned and very data-driven, hopefully, as well. You do the LCAP adoption. A good board would evaluate themselves after they evaluated the superintendent, how effective they thought they were. It's great to sometimes get feedback and be able to speak openly about ways that you think the board could perform at a more effective level. And then you go to your annual conference, and that's where you have fun, right? You learn some things and you know, kind of try and work together as a team. You know, you don't have to wear your fancy clothes. You can, you know, go out for some nice dinners. It's really a place where you can come together and establish those one-on-one relationships.
I love it. So can I ask you a few questions? Let's say a board member has a passion project. You talked about safety. It could be about school lunch. It could be about reading, whatever these reading and ed tech, whatever these things are. How does a board member go about nudging that passion project through the district? Or, you know, what's that process look like? And maybe not just how to do it, but also timeline expectations of implementing something like that.
Yeah, so a lot of times if it's something that's probably going to move the needle, a good superintendent has it on his or her radar already, right?
Yeah.
So some of it goes back to that deep learning, like take nutrition, right? You know, if you were really interested in nutrition, you could have a whole dossier written on what's been done, right? And you might have known some of that and not known other parts. There could be other kind of fact building as you start to learn an issue on a deeper level. And then there would be probably points on the governance calendar where you would be getting a full update from the department that's in charge of that aspect. So that kind of comes back to the patients area. You might say, hey, I'm really interested in that. When is it going to come up on the calendar? Because I can't wait to hear about what's been happening in that department, right? And then you might ask some questions of your fellow board members to see if some of your ideas landed with any of them. Now, again, we have the Brown Act. So you might have one board member that you want to have lunch with or have a phone conference with and see if they share any of your ideas. You can't ever have that lunch or that phone conference with two of them. That's a Brown Act violation. Then the board's not doing their work openly. Goes back to that very first slide. So it's a process is the answer.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
And then the flip of that, if a community member has an idea, right? Like a parent has an idea, we'll use nutrition as the same hypothetical. How does that engagement happen with the board members, say, for example? What is the most productive way for community to engage with board members?
Yeah, I mean, there's many ways. I always liked hearing and seeing people in meetings. You're there, you're ready, you got your notepad. Um, whether it relates to an agenda item or not, I think it's great. It's on the record. Board member could go back and say, "What did they say? Somebody mentioned a comment about this a couple months ago." So that's always available, right? Comment on agenda or non-agenda item. For parents, sometimes that was hard, so they could submit a comment in writing. We talked about that 4 to 6 hours of board meeting preparation well before the meeting, right? Maybe the Friday the agenda is posted, but there's actually a lot of preparation on the day of a meeting because you're going through and reading all of the written comments.
Sure.
And there's always the opportunity to email board members too, and maybe solicit their input on an item. So hopefully
Okay, we have a couple of audience questions. One is, what larger issues do you think school boards, particularly in California, are going to grapple with in the next 5 to 10 years?
Ooh, that's a good one. So remember, as a community funded district, we're like 10% of California districts and unlike 90% of districts. But this is pretty significant for the state of California. The overall enrollment in 3/4 of California schools are declining, right? We're having net migration out of our state and we're having declining birth rates. And so most districts are facing fiscal contraction, right? Which means consolidating schools, which comes down to board members, and reduction in force, which comes down to boards. And neither of those are easy tasks. I see some of my fellow trustees having to deal with those items, and they are very, very challenging. That's what's happening statewide. And that's also coupled with pandemic dollars that were one-time funds given for, academic recovery that have sunsetted. So I say that just as a statewide answer. And I also think we have to be aware of that when we're thinking about our district, because our district is very different. We continue to see, stable to moderate growth in our revenue because we're driven by property tax revenue and not daily attendance. So, it's a little bit of a mixed answer. Aside from that, things that do affect us, I still think AI is really important. I think there's a lot of chaos at the federal government level. I think that those items still are going to affect school boards in the next couple years.
Okay, then another question we have is individual first year training. Can you share what that entails?
Yeah, individual first year training. CSBA even offers a whole series of trainings for new trustees. You can do those. I did them all online. I think a lot of it also is getting trained on what's happening in your district. So, when I was a new board member, I did a site walk to learn each site, and sometimes many, many times walking different areas of a campus, reading those books, starting to know what projects were already in progress. There's a lot of them when you come on a board. For example, when I came on the board, the Thurston Field modernization was underway. A huge project, had been in the works for years.
Yeah.
And so you're getting faced with having to approve things. You don't maybe know the background. Um, you weren't reading the 4 hours of, details on that for those board meetings. So you kind of have to get up to speed. So a
Yeah.
lot of that happens in the first year.
Okay. I think those are all the questions we have for this portion of your presentation. So if you want to move on to the second part, we can.
I will. I will. Thank you, Shaheen. Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit about bonds. We're going to start a little blast to the past with the 2001 bond. This was Measure R. I think this is kind of fun to go through because I see and the hard work of people. I have neighbors, I have colleagues that worked on this bond, and I see my kids benefiting from it. And I want to just kind of share a little bit for people that aren't tracking this as closely what happened in 2001.
Can
So
I also ask you just to share generally, like define a bond for everyone on this webinar, just in case, so just make sure we're all on the same page.
yeah, so a bond is a voter approved tax that has very specific strings attached with what types of ways it's going to be spent on a school facility or in a school. This one was 25-year, 39 million. In present day dollars, that's about 70 to 80, I think, when I looked it up. It passed with 80.4% approval rate. We issued 2 series there. You can see the amounts. And we actually refunded and refinanced that. We had moved up in our bond rating. We have the highest bond rating. And when that happened, we actually saved the taxpayers some money, which is really cool. That was basically when everybody was refinancing, right? Even your mortgage to get a lower rate. That's the easiest way to think about it, but really smart move. And then what did this money, this $39 million, go towards? We updated classrooms, and I say we, this wasn't me, this is 2001, but this was, Ketta Brown, this was Bob Whalen, this was the many other wonderful board members at the time that did this work. But they built a performing arts, the theater and the gym at Thurston Middle School. You can see the gym down there with the girls playing basketball. They added the 4th grade wing at Top of the World in the kindergarten area. Kindergarten rooms by ed code have to be larger than a 1st grade room. It seems counterintuitive because bodies are little, but they take up a lot of space. And we put in all new energy efficient lights and windows. They redid the science labs and tech classrooms at the high school, among others. There are probably projects on here that I have missed. They completed in 2004. So when you're in the gym at Thurston, or you're in a 5th grade classroom at Top of the World, or a science lab at the high school, I like to think, well, thank you, Measure R, right? Because I can't imagine not having those things. That's how I think of it.
It's hard to even imagine. Yeah.
Right? So now let's look at kind of what that looks like for a community member, for a property owner, just to understand kind of what it costs you as a taxpayer, this Measure R. So I have an actual property tax bill here, the dreaded property tax bill. And you can see here that we've got this part highlighted. Laguna Beach USD 2010 R, you can see the rate and the value, the assessed value of the property at about $1.7 million. And the tax that's getting paid is $155 a year. So that's what Measure R is costing us. That's about 42 cents a day. Everybody can look theirs up. If you're a property owner, you can look it up. I put the website link in there. You just put in your address and you can see it. And your assessed value, right? What your home is worth, which is limited, how much you can escalate, thanks to Prop 39. If your assessed value was $1 million, you'd be paying $87 a year. Just as some examples, if you had a $4 million home, you'd be paying $350 a year. So I'll stop there. Is there questions on that?
So far, so good. I think no questions. Well, actually, let me just double check. No questions from the community on that. So we're good. We can keep going.
Okay. So now we've got this as a possible source of funds. So now we've got this 2001 bond being set to be paid off by property owners in 2028. And there are, there's this question, will the bond just fall off the bill or will it be extended? And to be extended, this is completely dependent on voter approval. It's not something the board can decide one way or another, at least at the stage that it was on the ballot. It has to be run on a statewide ballot, so the primary or general midterm in 2026. And this is up to the board, right? If they wanted to pursue this or not. If the board wanted to pursue it and it was approved by voters, we could access close to 80 million for facilities upgrades without increasing anybody's tax rates. So a lot of districts, when they have a bond kind of sunsetting, start to think about this. Are there needs in our school for facilities? Because it's appealing if nobody's tax rates were going to go up.
Sure.
And then a little bit about school bonds. You asked about this earlier, but school bonds, when they are passed, the funds have to stay local. It requires a citizens oversight committee, which is kind of cool. There are mandatory annual audits, public disclosures, and they only can be used for the voter-approved projects. So when you're placing a school bond on a ballot, you have to say exactly what it's going to get used for. And then those are the things it can get used for. You can't have a new idea and, say, hey, over here, you've got some money, let's spend it over here now. And so, what does all this mean? How indebted is our district maybe compared to other districts? Should we be taking on more debt or let debt fall off our books? And Jeff Dixon once showed us a slide in one of our public board meetings. It shows all the 28 school districts in the county, and we're at the bottom of the list in a good way because we have the least debt by far of any district. So we would say like we're the least indebted of and most fiscally sound, especially since our revenues are projected to continue to increase. And that's one of the reasons we have that AAA rating.
And Kelly, just one note of correction, it's Prop 13, right? That keeps the property taxes at a sort of steady clip, not Prop 39. I think you said 39.
Yes, thank you.
I just wanted to make sure, in case people started looking things up on the internet.
Yeah, and I think 39 might have changed. You used to have to pass a school bond by 2/3 vote, and maybe 39 changed it to a 55. It has something to do with bonds as well. So look that one up too. Google both of them.
Sounds good. Yeah. And sorry, so you were wrapping up that we're one of the least indebted school districts in Orange County. Is that what you said?
Yes. And that should be looked at, right?
Is there such a thing in school districts of being under leveraged, meaning whether you should be unlocking some funds because it's a good use of, there's ways to use it in a fiscally responsible way?
Probably, but that's a better question for an expert, right? A bond consultant, a municipal financing expert. I just look at opportunities, right? What's the vision for the district? Which is where we get into possible use of funds. So we did a 10-year facilities master plan update. We did a fairly significant one and looked at all the sites. We did this in 2022 and 2023, and we approved it at the end of 2023. You can see the date there. I think it was December 14th, and had some projects that were identified as possible uses of funds over the next 10 years or needs, right, that would align with the district's educational goals. Some of them, and I'll show you visually, it's probably more cool to see them on the schematics if you weren't tracking the facilities master plan update. But TK is a big area. So TK rooms by state ed code are supposed to be larger. So you can't just take a first grade room or a fourth grade room and turn it into a TK room if you want to be in compliance. We identified a lot of field enhancements, and a lot of that was driven by the community response that we got to the modernization that we did at Thurston. Leaving the turf versus natural grass debate aside, because I don't want to get into that. What we saw was when you modernize a field and make it really playable, the whole community benefits. And we saw that as a game changer. And that really encouraged the board to look at improving all of our fields to have that type of usage for the community. We had sand volleyball. We had this concept of a better counseling center. Keep in mind that this was when the Surgeon General came out in this time period and basically said we were in this major mental health youth crisis like we had never seen before. and
Yeah.
our counseling facilities were very subpar. They're in one of the oldest buildings, and so that one part of the high school, there's some classrooms, and the administration and counseling center is kind of one of the oldest structures still on campus, maybe outside of the theater, I would imagine. We know about the aquatic center modernization. That was a big need. And then at the middle school, there were things identified like field lighting, seating at the gym that doesn't meet the current needs. And so they wanted to expand that, theater enhancements there too. At the elementaries, there was a request for better cafeterias that can actually cook healthier food. At the district office, many things, but mostly accessible restrooms. We looked at a boardroom that was a little more purpose-built. So those are some ideas. And I will show you if you guys are interested. I know we're kind of short on time, but these were the plans. So we had the top of the world plan, and we had the El Moro plan. You can see these modernized areas are shown. So it was pretty comprehensive. At Thurston, a new maker lab, a theater enhancement, a gym enhancement. At the high school, probably the more significant one, a new counseling center, a modernization of the patio behind that area. And so that was where we were in the end of December. And that I think is important to put back out there to the community when the concept of a bond and an extension comes up, because those were, a series, a vision from the board of what could be done with an expansion of facilities dollars. So I'll stop there.
Yeah, I'm going to remind everyone you can put questions in the Q&A chat box. I will also say, Kelly, one of the things I heard was that some of the filing areas are actually old bathrooms, and file cabinets are stored in bathtubs right now, right? Because the buildings weren't really set up for modern use, just given their age and things. But anyhow, thank you so much for all of this super helpful information. I think one question that we get from community members is this idea of like, $80 million or $90 million sounds like a lot of money. And maybe you can kind of, if you can, contextualize that. And maybe that's a question for a different person. Maybe you can just help point us in that direction to get that answer.
It seems like a lot of money. I think things are expensive these days. We're seeing even with the pool, the modernization of a pool. I think there's cost escalations. Everything costs more the longer you wait. So, even those numbers, right, are likely to increase. Yes, it does seem like a lot. Just think of what it costs to do a small project on your home, and
Sure.
now try and do it in the middle of a school campus. Again, it goes back to the 2001 example that we gave, right? At the time, you undertook large projects that are lasting for generations,
Right.
improved your facility. So it's this investment in what our district is, right? I mean, even
Right.
take,
And now we can't imagine a world where we don't have a Thurston gym, right? Or
correct.
et cetera, et cetera. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. And some of the research that we've done at Fuel has really shown that um, good up, kept up modern facilities actually really makes a difference in student outcomes, actually. That there's benefit not just to it looks pretty is one thing, but to your point, it's useful to the community. It actually helps student outcomes. There's real data to support that.
Oh yeah, there's so much. And I mean, I would say we have nice classrooms. The TK rooms, that is a whole new program that we've added. And so there's some room to come up to speed there. Our classrooms are really nice. All the work we did with the 4C projects with all of that, those are really nice.
Yeah.
We kind of need to think bigger than that, though, right? If we've got that dialed, and we've got really great scores, and we've got really good teaching, then think about counseling, right? Think about how that affects, right? We've got these really great student counselor ratios. So does our facility support that as a value in our community? Now think about athletics. People will always give boards a hard time about investing in fields or stadiums or, what a pool. You get all these people that say, oh, that doesn't apply to my kid. They don't play that sport. But what we know from the data is that when students feel connected to school, and guess where that connection comes through for a 16-year-old guy or gal?
Yeah, a sports game. Yeah.
Yeah, a sport or a theater, whatever. They're connected to schools through their extracurriculars. That's what makes them part of that. And that, guess what? Improves the educational outcomes. So, one of our metrics that we tracked really closely was the percentage of students that feel really connected to school. And our numbers are off the charts, and we want them to be higher. And one way you do that is by continuing to have really great facilities. And so I never shied away from improving fields or pools or theaters because all that stuff matters, and it matters a lot. So
Yeah, I think one of the sweetest public comments I saw where it was during one of the pool meetings, and it was volleyball players coming to support their swim team friends and saying, "Well, we love it when people get to come watch our games, and we'd love to go watch their swim meets or something." It was very sweet, but this idea of like we're connected and we're all kind of here together as students and want to cheer each other on, and it was very, very touching. Yeah.
yeah, and those, and for the kids that aren't feeling connected too, we want to find them, and we want to find them with great counseling. We want a world-class counseling center at the high school. We want those great TK rooms, with lots of space to build blocks and little potties. We want those too. But
Yeah.
all of it just takes money. It kind of
Yeah.
takes a lot of money. And so the question is really for the community. Like, do we want to invest in that? Or are we good and nobody's going to have any regrets in 20 years? Because I will say this, I'm not a bond expert or consultant, but I would think that it'd be much harder to add a tax after it's already gone away than to extend one. So
Sure. Well, this has been wonderful, Kelly, and maybe hang on, there might be one. Um, oh, there was just someone cheering on volleyball players. Um, but yes, I really appreciate you taking the time. I obviously have known you for forever and a day from all of our volunteering together at various PTA events, and I've always just appreciated and admired your commitment and your service to our kids and our community, and your guidance along the way, and all the work in the gardens and making everything so sweet and lovely for our kiddos. So thanks for once again showing up for our community on this webinar. We really appreciate your time, and if we have any follow-up questions that people send our way, we might send them to you and then give out proper answers.
no, that's great. And it was really nice to be with you guys tonight. And it was really nice to be on the board for the last 4 years. So I appreciate the invitation, and I appreciate the time spent with all of you guys.
Yeah, thanks so much, Kelly. Bye.